Everybody, so today I am going to build a kind of like a podcast platform inside Laravel, and I will record this like I would do a live session. So that means I will not cut out here anything unless I'm doing something obviously wrong, for example searching for a typo or something like that. Of course then I would cut it out. Other than that I would just leave it as it is, and I do this for two main reasons. The first one is pretty obvious: much less work for me. I don't need to cut as much or prepare as much as I would normally do with my tutorials that are on my channel. And I think it's also for you, like, maybe not the smoothest experience, but at the same time the more realistic experience. So I think a developer, what makes a good developer is actually to be able to understand how to fix errors or how to approach them, right? Because when you're doing apps or when you're developing apps, errors will occur at some point and you need to know how to fix them. And so with these kind of like pre-scripted tutorials, they can give you a kind of like a false image on how like developing works or programming. So I think this approach is more realistic. And yeah, if you go to my channel here, I have like made already a tutorial in Laravel where I show how to build a blog app, and I explained there pretty much everything you need to know to get started. And as you can see, it's also really popular, it has almost 3.3k views, and it seems like people are enjoying it. And if you compare this to my race tutorials, I have there on average maybe 100 to 300 views. So it's not all about like views, but if that's what people are interested in, I don't have a problem with that at all. And it's also always a great idea to know more than just one framework. Companies always like the fact if you are capable of like developing in different kind of environments or different languages. So my tip here is always learn or master one framework that you like. And once you have mastered one framework, you can pretty much apply the knowledge that you have gained from this framework and apply it to any other framework, because at the end of the day, it's pretty much the same kind of approach, okay? Especially if another framework is following the MVC concept. So I have here the documentation open up simply because like I don't use Laravel every day, so pretty sure I will need to use the documentation at some point. So to get started, let's open up the terminal, and here let's cd to desktop, and I will create your new like project and call it podcast app, like so. Hit enter, and I will use for this tutorial as my database SQLite. And so I think in my other tutorial where I show how to build a blog app, I use MySQL. For this tutorial we use SQLite simply because I think it's much more convenient and like easier to set up, and especially for like prototyping I think it fits much better. So in order to be able to use SQLite, we have to do a few things in Laravel. So in Rails, for example, you don't need to do anything. Rails is using SQLite by default. In Laravel we have to do a few things in order to make it work, but it's actually not that hard or complicated. So let's cd to podcast app, and here I will open up the text editor. And of course, by the way, you can use any database you want, okay? So that's completely up to you. If you're familiar with using like Laravel together with MySQL, feel free to do so. So I will open up here the database PHP file, and here at the top we have these default settings, and currently we are using MySQL, so let's change this to SQLite. And down here we have predefined settings, and here where it says database, notice that at the database path the file is called database.sqlite. So what we need to do is to go to the database folder, create here a new file called database.sqlite, and it seems like I already have done this. Well, actually not. Something went wrong here, so I will delete the file here because it seems like there's some issue going on. Move to trash. Right, new file database.sqlite. There we go. Okay, so now you need also to copy here the path. Now we close this here, so that we are staying organized here. And then we need to go to the .environment file. And here where it says db_connection, we need to change this to SQLite. And here where it says db_database, we need to paste in the path to the database SQLite file. There we go. And so once we have done this, we can then run php migrate, and then we should get back the message that the migration table was created successfully, which is the case. If you have an error on your side, make sure to follow the exact same steps that I have shown, and yeah, normally it should work, right? So here right in the beginning, I will now create the authentication, and luckily in Laravel, all we have to do is to type in php make auth, and this will then create the authentication system. And with that, we can start the server php serve. And if I go to localhost 8000, we have now here the links to login and register. I will register quickly a new user with an easy password, and we should get back the message that we have signed up successfully. There we go, you're logged in. Alright, so I will start with like the user profile page, because that's like the main page that will have the podcast itself. So I will create here a new controller, call it users controller, and hit enter. Then we can restart the server and go back to the text editor. So inside the app HTTP controllers, we have now the users controller. And because we only want like to display the user's profile page, we only need the show file or show page. So I will create here the public function show, add here the ID, and then we need to find first off or define the user, saying user find ID, and then we will just return the view users.show, and then we will also drop down here the like user variable, like so. Okay, and of course we need also to create the link. So here I will create a new route, call it /users, and then we need to add the ID and point to users controller at show. And now I will close everything, and then inside resources views I create a new folder called users, and then inside here new file called show.blade.php. and here we need to extend the layouts app, and also like add here the section content, and then down here empty section, like so. Alright. And normally, like we could add here an H3 and say, hello, this is the show page. And then we should be also able to render like the ID, but let's try this now out. Let's test this first out. So we go to users /1 and app controller user not found. Yeah, that's because inside users controller, we need to make sure to use app and then user, like so. And with that, we get now the page back. And so I will try now to render the ID. So user ID, and it should give us back the number 1, which is the case. And if I type in here 2, we'll have an error because currently we just have 1 user registered in our app. So Laravel is using Bootstrap 4 by default, which is really convenient. So we can immediately use here the container, for example, and drop that all inside the container, like so. And this should give us back some kind of styles array applied to it. There we go. Now we have here this kind of gap, and yeah, I would say like for this tutorial, I will add here kind of a card with the user information, and here on the right side I want to display like the podcast from this user or the show. Okay, so what I will do is to create here a row, and then inside the row I will create an MD I guess 4, and then a cards, and inside the card a div card body. And here I will just render for now the user, like I think name. So there we go. And let's make sure that the card has a minimal height. So I will add here style, min height, and set it to, I don't know, 300 pixels. There we go. Maybe 500. Alright, so we can remove this now from here. And outside the call MD4, we create another one, and here I will use an 8. And here again we add a card and a div card body. And here I will add a list. Okay, and so inside the list I will simply add now dummy data, so episode, and then how you're doing. Okay, then let's create another link, see number 2, and let's call it you're doing good. And let's copy this instead of just rewriting this here 2 more times. Nope. And then the last one is, so obviously these are just kind of dummy data, and yeah, let's go back and refresh this, and now we have something like that. And obviously this would be a really fun podcast, like with these kind of episodes sounds like a lot of fun, I guess. So yeah. Okay, so we have set up this, and to make this nicer we could also add here like a style min height 500 pixels to make this equally to the left side. There we go. Alright, so we got that, and we can wrap up our username in H3, I guess. This will make this look a little bit better. There we go. Okay, so yeah, we got that down. I'm pretty happy with that. So the next thing that we need to do is to create some kind of like the podcast itself, and then the controller for the podcast. So the first thing I would do is to check out what we can do with a model. So make model and then get the helper tag. And I want to definitely add or create a controller, I guess, for the podcast itself. I also want to have the migration file, and I think that's actually all we need to do. So let's try it out. So PHP artisan make model, call it podcast, add here the C flag for the control and then the M tag for the migration, hit enter. And so it says now that the model was created successfully and the controller was created successfully, and we also have now a create podcast table file. So if we head over to our text editor and go to database migrations, we have now here a new migration file similar to Raise, and here we can define the data. So I will add here a string and a title, I guess. Then we could add a description, but for simplicity of this tutorial I would just add here another string and call it file name. And then I also want to add here an integer for the user ID, and then we also need to get like foreign for the user ID, and then we want to add the references ID and then on users, like so. Okay, and make sure to spell this correctly, foreign. There we go. So with that we can go back and say PHP artisan migrate, and this has now migrate the file, so we can start the server. Actually we don't need to start server. What we need to do now is to connect the podcast to the user. So I will go to user PHP first, and here somewhere at the top I will create a new function called podcast, and then here I will return this has many and then app / podcast, and then I would copy this here and go to podcast.php, and here I would paste it in. And of course we need to change this from podcast to user, and instead of say has many, we need to change this to belongs to, and then app user, like so. There we go. So we can confirm that this is working by going to PHP artisan tinker, create here a new variable user, and then equal this to app user first. And then if I type in podcast, we should get back an empty array, which is the case. Awesome. So let's exit that, and now we can start the server, and I will head over to text editor again, and here where it says app HTTP controllers, we should have now the podcast controller, because we ran the like the C flag, I guess it was. And as you can see, it's currently empty, so that's not something I wanted. I wanted like to have all the resources included, so I will delete here the podcast controller, and instead I would go back and create here the controller separately, and I would connect it with the model, like so, and then add the R tag for the resource. And of course I need to add a name, so podcasts controller. Hit enter. There we go. So I will start the server, and normally we should now have all like the CRUD operations included. There we go. So this was what I was looking for initially. So let's make like sure that this is working. I will add your ID because I will create nested resources for the podcast itself. So what we can do here is first find like the user. So user find ID, and because of that we also need to include here the user. And for now I would just return the view podcast index and add here the user variable, like so. Okay, and so with that I can go to resources, views, create a new folder called podcasts, and then inside podcasts I will create a new file called indexblade.php, and I will copy this here from the user show PHP file and paste it inside the index file, and remove here all the divs whatsoever, and so that we are just left with the section and the extents declaration here at the top. And so I will add here just an h3 and say this is index podcasts, save the file, and of course we need to go to web.php, and here I will copy this, paste it in, and add here / to podcasts, and point here instead to the users controller to podcasts controller add index. So with that we should be able now to go to podcasts and get the index page back. Awesome. Now we don't really need like an index page, I guess, because I will render all the episodes here on the user's profile page, but I want also to have like kind of links, so once we click them we should be able to go to the show page. But before we can do that we need to create some kind of data. So before we create here also like the form and the create file, I will shut down the server and I will go to documentation quickly and look for like how I can see it inside Laravel. And like there's a command we can run, so PHP artisan make seeder, and let's call it podcast table seeder. Hit enter, and so this has then created the seeder. And when we head over to the text editor inside the database seeds folder, we should now have a podcast table seeder. And I will copy this here quickly from the website, like the example code here, and paste it in. Of course, we want changes from users to podcast, and here I think we call it title, and this one is the file name, and we don't want to use here an email. I mean, we could use .mp3 to make it like more realistic, I guess. And then we also need to add the user ID, and we will do this for this example on our own. We will simply add here the number 1 because I know that I just have one user and the ID of this user is simply 1, okay? So what we need to do before we finally run our seed is to go to the database seeder file and call the podcast table seeder class like so. And then let's double check what kind of command do we need to run in order to make this work. Okay, php artisan db seed, php artisan db seed. And we get now a message back, seeding podcast table seeder and database seeding complete successfully. Awesome. So let's try to confirm this by going to php artisan tinker. And here one more time, I will create quickly a user variable, user first. And now we should get back, when I say user podcast, some kind of data, which is the case. Okay, so we have here the ID of 1, the file name with the mp3 tag, and then the user ID. Awesome. So let's shut down the server and then php artisan serve. And now we are pretty much ready to go. So inside resources, views, podcast, I will create a new file called show.blade.php, and we copy pretty much everything here from the index file and paste it in. And here I would simply say, hello, this is the show blade PHP file from podcasts. And then I would go to the podcast controller, and here I want to get inside the show file just the ID, like so. And then I will set over here the podcast and say podcast find ID, and then return view podcast show, and then drop down the podcast variable. And of course we need to create now also our route, so we'll copy this here, and we need to add here another ID, and that we call simply pod ID, and we want to point here to show. So when I go back now and type here in podcast and then 1, this should normally work. Okay, so we get now here the show page back, and let's confirm this, that everything's working by trying to access here the variables, so podcast, and then I guess title, to get the title back. There we go. So we have the title, and we could also get the ID back. So ID, and this should give us back the number 1, which is the case. And of course we could also access the mp3 like dummy file or string, but I won't do this now because obviously this is working. So we can remove here the h3 for now, like so, and there we go. Okay, now I will create here a link so that when I click here on the episode, this should take me to first of the episode. And the next thing is that I want to be this here kind of like also dynamically rendered. Okay, so I will close everything, and then inside the user, actually show blade PHP 5 from the user, so resources views user, I will go down here, and here where we like have our dummy data, we create a for each, and then actually I think the syntax is here different. I think I need to use here an at and then for each, like so, and then podcast as podcast, and then make sure to add here and for each. Okay, obviously this won't work because we have not defined the podcast variable. So inside podcast controller, what I will do now is to go here to the where's show file? There we go. Or actually, it's not the podcast controller, but the users controller, of course, because we're on the users profile page. What we need to do now is to define the podcast, right? And since we have established the connection with the user and the podcast, we can say podcast like so. And all we have to do now is to create a new variable here called podcast and add here the podcast variable. So normally if I go back now, this should work, but it doesn't. So podcast, make sure to save the file, and still nothing. Yeah, because of course I need to create a new link and add here the podcast. And for example, let's get just the title, right? Makes the most sense. There we go. Now it works. Okay, and so I will take this here and paste it here in. And here, instead of just saying 1, I will get now the podcast ID. And this should now be dynamically rendered. There we go. We can remove here the link at the top. Much better. Now let's make this a real link so that we can click on that. So I will wrap out the link, or actually here the podcast, I guess, in H tag. I think this should work. So there we go. And here I will use some PHP syntax or Laravel syntax to get the route. So here I would simply say podcast.show, and what I want to access or drop down, or the ID that I want to give the podcast show page, is first off the user, by saying user ID, and then I also want to get the podcast ID and point to the podcast variable. And now this should already work, but it doesn't. Podcast show not defined. I think we have to add a name for the podcast path here. So name podcast show. And now it works. So if I click on that, you can see we have here this preview on the bottom, and it says users 1, podcast 1. So obviously this is working. Awesome. Okay, so the next thing would be to create the create form and the create page. So for that, I will copy this while we're at it, and instead of saying pod ID, and make sure to paste it above the show page, okay? Otherwise it won't work. So here we say /create, and this should point to create, and it's called podcast.create. And then inside the podcast controller, we have here this create file, and because it's nested, we need to add the ID, and I would just copy this here to find the user that tries to add currently a new podcast. And that is basically all we need to add here, I guess. So we want to get back then the podcast create, and then we add the user variable again. And now when I close this here, go to resources, views, podcasts, and create a new file called create blade PHP. And as always, I would just copy this here from show, paste it in, and I just want to create here quickly a form. The action is the route that currently doesn't exist, but we will create this route in just a moment. Podcast store, and I don't think we need to add here anything else. Probably the user ID, so let's just add here for now the user and then user ID. And the method is post, and then we also need to add the eng type. So I think it's just form data like so, but I will just double check this in just a moment. Then we need to add here the CSRF tag, I think, and then the method of post. Then we need to add here an input, and it's a text with the name of title, placeholder, add your podcast or episode name, And then let's wrap this up in a div form group so that we have immediately styles applied to that. And then we can, once we have done this, also just copy this instead of just rewrite this all the time or add it later on. I will add here also quickly a class of form control. And there we go. So I copied this now. And this one is not the title, but for now just the file name. And your episode file. And for now we will add the user ID on our own. So we'll change this here to number, and then this is the user ID, and then add your user ID. And finally we need to add the button, which is the type submit. And we could add also a class of btn outline primary add episode. So if I go back now and go to podcast create, we'll have the error because the podcast store is not defined. So inside web.php, we copy this, paste it in, and just change here create to store, and the same applies for here to store. And the path is not /store, but just the podcast, or we could redirect to the user profile page. So now we have here this form, and make sure to wrap this up inside a container, div container. There we go. All right, much better. So I will add now some kind of dummy data, hello world, the mp3, and for the user ID we'll add 1. Click on add episode, and then we get the arrow, the post method is not supported for this route. So the arrow comes from here because we still say get, but the store path is a post route, so we need to change this, or change from get to post. And with that, everything should work. So view, hello world, whatsoever, d1, post, and there we go. And for some reason, our user profile page was empty, so I guess we have to use redirect. You will see that when I shut down the server and go to Arson Tinker and type in podcasts equals to app podcast all, you see that we still have just one podcast, even though we created just one. So why is that so? So inside podcast controller, you notice that our store method is completely empty. So because this is a nested resource, I guess we have to add the ID here as well and find first of the user, but I'm not 100% sure about that. Let's just try it out. And so the next thing that I will do is to create here the podcast and say new podcast. And then we will pretty much just add here the title and equate this to the request title, and then the podcast. How was it called? File name, I guess. For now, we just use the string. Later on, we will change this to the file path. So here, just file name, and then podcast, and then forward. And I think the last thing is the user ID. So request user ID. Then we go on to save the podcast, and then return view. I guess podcasts. Actually, I want to point back to the user show page, but I'm not quite sure if I can do that from the podcast controller. Let's just try it out. Users.show, and here first off I will add the user variable, and then also the Actually, we don't need the podcast variable. I think we're fine with just adding here the user ID. So what I will do now is first off exit here Tinker, PHP artisan, serve, and then let's go head over to podcast create one more time. And here I will quickly add some kind of dummy data one more time, and this should not finally work, but it doesn't. So undefined variable podcast view. Okay, so we need to add the podcast. Well, let's just define that here quickly. I mean, I think we could also use here redirect, but let's just try it out. I will type here in redirect instead and add here no variable whatsoever. So notice that we have definitely created data because we have now our second episode here. But I want to make sure that our redirection is working correctly. So create, add some data here, use ID of 1, and we get now not found. So yeah, we'll undo this. We'll add here the view again. And so what we need to do, or what I will do here, is to create a podcast variable and equal this to the user podcast. So with that, we rehydrate basically our user's profile page. So here we need to add then also the podcast variable like so, and with that we should be all set. So users 1, podcast 1. Actually, I want to go to create, and here again just add some dummy data, and there we go. We were redirected to our user's profile page, and we have created a new episode, and we get all the data, and everything is working. And notice now that for each episode we are looping every time the dummy data. So of course we need to change that. So inside the show users profile page, we need to remove here the dummy data, even though there were some awesome titles for episodes. And there we go. Okay, so everything is now working. All right, so we got that. So the next thing that I would like to do is to add here some kind of real audio file, right? So currently we just use here the a string inside our podcast controller when we are creating the file name. And of course that's not something I want to do. I want to add here the file, and I want users also to be able to upload audio files. So let me think quickly about this. What would be the best way to approach this? I guess the first thing I want to do is to go here to show file from the user's profile page, and here where we have the username down here, let's create a button, and let's make this a link to the route podcasts create, and I think we need to add the user ID, and here we should be able to say create a new episode. There we go. And let's make sure to add here a class of btn outline primary. There we go. So if I click on that, and we need to move the link outside the button like so. All right, much better. So if I click on that, this should take us to create page. There we go. Everything's working as accepted. So now let's see how we can deal with file uploads, file storage. The very first thing that we need to do, to my knowledge, is to I think create the PHP RSN storage link. But before we do that, let's just scroll through the documentation. I just want to make sure I'm not forget here something. So I definitely want to use storage put. So I will copy this here and head over to the podcast controller. And here at the top, I will just paste it in. Okay, so with that, we can use the storage library and retrieving files, downloading files, file URLs. All right, storing files, file uploads. Okay, I will just copy this here. Or actually I will use the storage for that. So here where we have the store function, what I will do here is paste in like the method from there. And I will rename this to URL because that makes more sense to me. And then I will copy this here from the top, paste it here in. Instead of saying request file name, I would say storage. I think, do we need to get the link, or I think the URL. And here we need to add the URL variable, like so. I think we are fine with that. Make sure to change this to file name. And this one here to public. Okay. And so, because we say here file name, inside create_blade PHP, we like have here the input field, but we're saying still text, so I want to change this to file. And make sure this has the same exact name as here, file_name, otherwise it won't work, okay? And we also need to make sure the enc type here, how to set this up, otherwise it will also not work. So Laravel multi-part form data. Actually, Google knew immediately what we were looking for, so it's multi-part and then /multi-part/ form data. Let's double check that. Multi-part form data. There we go. Make sure to add that, otherwise it won't work. Okay. So when I go back now and refresh the form here, you will see that we have now here like a path file field, and I can add now here a title, and I have here like a few files already. So I have a very short file. Make sure to add here in the beginning a very like small file that is less than 1 megabyte in the size. All right. So drag and drop that here over as your just user ID. Click on add episode, and it seems like we have not created any episodes, do we? Well, to be able to confirm this, we need to go to the show page from the user's podcast here, and let's try to display here the file name. Let's see what we get back. There we go. All right, so we have now, I guess, an MP3 file. And is this file working? Let's try to create a link for that. And here we say assets. And let's wrap that up. There we go. Okay, so if I click on that, you see we have here a preview from the link, so obviously this won't work. So I will remove here the semicolon. Okay, notice now that it points to the file. Let's see what happens. Okay, still nothing. I will go here quickly to the let's close here, I think, to the storage app public folder, and currently we have here a file actually. So seems like somehow it worked, but for some reason we cannot like play the file. So why is that so? Let's try it out one more time. Right, so HTML accept audio. I think we have to add the accept here. Let's go over to create blade PHP. And here where we want to add the file, I will add here the like the audio. So let's try this out one more time. Let's go back, create a new episode, whatsoever, add here quickly a new file, and then add episodes. And for some reason I need to refresh here my user's profile page. We will take care of that as well in just a moment, but it's still not working. So inside show blade PHP, for the podcast, what if I say URL? Still not working. Nope. I try to wrap this now up. Okay, so I think that has something to do because we didn't run the PHP artisan like storage link. So let's make sure to run this as well. PHP artisan storage link. There we go. PHP artisan serve. And I will retry this here. Create new episode. Choose file. Add the user ID. Okay, obviously this is not working. So let's remove here the semicolon. It's not found. What I will do now is I will go to form, like HTML audio player. And I found some where I think it was on W3 Schools a reference for that. So I will just copy this here and paste it here under the link. And instead of like just point here to nothing, I will point to podcast for its file name, like so. And normally, if I go back now and refresh the page, we should see like the audio controls for the audio, which is the case. So let's see, I will increase here my volume, hit on play, and nothing happens. So okay, I cut it here, the video, even though I said in the beginning I will not cut the video, but I couldn't figure it quite out, and so I end up like just refreshing the database. So so what you need to do is to type in PHP artisan, migrate and refresh, hit enter, and so this will reset all your database, and make sure to run like the PHP artisan storage link for it. So if I do that, I get the message that the public storage directory already exists. And I guess it has something to do with the fact that I didn't run the public storage command or storage link command in the first place. I think this leads to kind of like bugs like this. I think I faced this issue before, so I think it has something to do with that. Okay, so with that, I'm like able to create here new episodes, choose here file, just like we did before, so really nothing has here changed. And now we need to fix this here so that we don't, or I don't have to refresh here always the page. And so if I click now on the second episode, you see first off this has changed to storage and then to the file. So we could click on that and this would take us also to like the page where we could play this. Or we can click here now on the play button. So if I click play, you see it's only 1 second long and it's actually just a gun shooting. So I guess nothing fancier and actually nothing that has to do with a podcast. So what if you ask yourself, why did I choose the small file? is because by default PHP init sets the upload maximum size to 2 megabyte, I think. So if you want to change this, at least on a Mac, you can like open up a new tab, go to your root directory and say open /etc and then PHP inits or PHP in ini, like so. And this will open up the file here in your text editor, and you can search for let me close this here. So what you can do, it's quite a large file. You can use here the search bar and type in, for example, max, and this will give you back here the max upload file size, and I set this to 200 megabytes, and so by default this is set, I think, to 2 megabytes. So if you are uploading a file that is greater than this size, you will have this kind of like error string issue. So make sure to change that if you want to upload on your local machine like larger files. And I think we can also get to the max file. No, I think that was actually it. I don't think we need to change here anything else. Make sure to change to save it as an admin. So here in VS Code, I get normally the message that I need to save it as the admin, and then can click here on a button, and this will allow me to enter my password, and this will then save the file. Okay, so I will close this here, of course. So with that, I can, just in case you are wondering, and so with that I can restart the server again. And now I can go back and click here on create new episode, and I would call this like how you're doing again. And I got here some country songs, so I will add the country song, and there you go. And of course we need to change this dynamic as well. So let's click here and add episode, and as you saw or have seen, this took a little bit longer, so that's because the file was a little bit larger. So if I hit play here, and you notice that we are still getting here the first file back, even though I have clicked here on the second file. So we had definitely somewhere an issue with our with our routing here. So inside show we get the file name and the podcast. So we need to go to the show file here and double check everything. Yeah, we just passed here the podcast, but that's not what we want. We also need to get the user and point to the user, I guess ID. We can take that and paste it here in, so this way we make sure we find the user. And because we are not only trying to get the user, we also need like the pod app ID or something like that. Okay, so what we can do here, actually we don't need here to do anything, I guess. I think we will be fine with that. So let's try this one more time out. If I go back here and click on how you're doing, you see change to tree, but we still get here the first file. So this is still not working. Let's change this here to user. Yeah, this is not rendering dynamically. Why? Okay, we need to get here the pod ID, I guess. And now you see it's 3 minutes long, so we hit now play. So it's just a country song, I guess. I just found it somewhere on the internet, so All right, so let's stop that. And yeah, I guess that's working. Let's see. So we got that down. We can create new episodes. We display here the episodes. We can click on them. We can listen to them. So let's add here some kind of styles to the podcast page. And I will close here, I think. Go to Showblade PHP from the podcast. And so let's get started. Let's add here a div container, I guess. And I want to use here flexbox. So the flex row, flex rep, like so. And then I will copy this and make sure to paste it here in. And I want to justify the content to the center. So now we have something like that. And so I guess we can just make a div call md maybe 8. Add here a card and a card body. And inside that I will paste like the audio and the link to that. So we have now something like that, super awesome. And what I will do now is like add here an h2 and say episode, and then add here the like podcast title and remove this here from the top. Okay, episode how we are doing. We can remove here the link like so. So we are left just with the player. I guess we could add here some kind of styles. So style with I guess 100 with 100%. Okay, didn't change here anything at all. Let's inspect this here quickly. And well, it seems like it's working when I change this here inside the developer tool, but it's not working when I'm doing it here. So I guess I have a typo somewhere with 100%. Should work. Oh yeah, I added that to the control. So I will copy this and paste it in instead here. And with that, we should have this now full size. Awesome. Now let's add here a breaking line so that we have some kind of space between these two. How we are doing, and then down here we could add like a small, and then here like uploaded by, and then user name, right? Upload by Michael. And yeah, maybe let's add here quickly a button class btn outline info back. Okay, I'm fine with that. And of course we need to make this dynamically, so let's add here a link and add here route, and then we want to point to users show and add here the user variable like so, and we need to wrap this up. Okay, and so with that, well, we have an error, user show not defined. Let's go to web.php and make sure to add here for the show file also the name users.show. So with that, this should not work. So if I click back, this will go back. Okay, so I think we are pretty much finished with the app. So if I click now and create a new episode, we have to change here first off the user ID so that we don't have to add here the user ID on our own. So create.blade PHP, and instead of saying number, we can say hidden, and we can remove the placeholder and also a class because this will be not visible any longer. And instead I want to add the value, and here I want to add the user like ID, I guess. make sure to wrap that up inside a double quote. Okay, and just to confirm this, that it's working, let's add here the number again. And so we should now see the number 1 here added automatically, which is the case. So we undo this so that it's hidden again. And so with that, we're pretty finished with that. Let's add here like a retitle. Howdy. And I have also a notify purple plane, which is also just a song, but so if I click now play, this will obviously work. And while this is playing in the background, I will add here now some space also between these two. So and it's actually that song. I thought I had choose a different song. Okay, we have now here some kind of space. I think this is because I haven't refreshed the user's profile page. Now there we go, there's the different song. Okay, now the only thing that we need to figure out is okay, so it's working. Can download that. Alright, so what I want to do now here is like make sure that when I create a new episode, it goes to the user's profile page. And I think we need to redirect. That's the issue here, why this is not updating. So return redirect. So here where we say inside podcast controller, where we say create where do we have to create, or store function actually. So I would just uncomment this here, and instead I want to return redirect route, I guess. And here I can say users show, and then I should be able to drop down just the user like so. Let's see. Create new episodes, add here some titles, go down, add here the shotgun sound. And I think this refreshed this now automatically. There we go. Now we are, there's the sound of the shotgun. Awesome, and there we go. Now of course we could also make here, for example, a link to your profile so that we can click on that. What I will do now is quickly log out and register with another account, John Gambo, test2, passwords, register. And so I will go now to users2, and here I will create a new episode, upload a new file, shotgun, add episode. And notice now that our episode starts with 6. Alright, so that's obviously because we're just using the ID, and of course each ID is unique in its record, so it's not like connected to the user that has created the ID. So we could write an own function that will like calculate how many episodes a user has, and then like add, like increase the number by its own. So that's how we could change that. But like I said, I'm pretty happy with the result, and for simplicity of this tutorial, I will not bother with that. Okay, so that would be actually it. I hope you learned a lot today, and make sure if you liked the video to like it and subscribe to my channel if you like my tutorials on my teaching style. And if you want to see more Laravel stuff, make sure to write it down in the comment section, because currently I have no idea if people like more the like things in Laravel, or if they like more things in Rails or other frameworks. It seems like, based on the views, that people are more enjoying Vue and Laravel. So I mean, if that's that. I will like continue working with Laravel, but yeah. Alright, so thanks for watching guys, as always, and see you maybe next time. Bye.